The waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks below as he desperately flailed, his body tumbling through the air. The roar of the ocean swallowed his screams. There was no time to think, no time to react. 1 second, he had been posing for a harmless vacation photo. The next, he was falling to his death. This wasn't how the trip was supposed to end. From a marriage proposal gone wrong to a surfer facing a swordfish, to a tourist boat sailing right into a storm, these are some of the most disturbing deaths that happened while traveling. As always, viewer discretion is advised. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, glistening under the golden sun. The breeze was warm, the waves gentle, and the day seemed perfect on the beaches of Phuket, Thailand. For Roger Hussey, this was just another adventure and one of many in a life well lived. At 71 years old, Roger had seen more of the world than most people ever would. He was a successful businessman, a traveler, a man who embraced life with open arms. Originally from Australia, he had spent decades building his career, making smart investments. He enjoyed the fruits of his hard work by vacationing with his Thai wife Butsabong Thongsanka and soaking in the beauty of Thailand's shores. But Roger wasn't the type to just sit on the beach. He wanted something more, something thrilling. So, when he saw a parasailing boat offering parachute flights over the Andaman Sea, he didn't hesitate. He had never done it before, but why not? He had conquered business, traveled the world. What was one more adventure? So Roger signed up without hesitation. He listened carefully as the instructor quickly explained what to expect, where to place his hands, how the harness worked, and how the parachute would gently lift him off the boat and into the sky. A bright, colorful parachute lay out behind the speedboat, ropes neatly organized and carefully connected to the harness now strapped around Roger's waist and thighs. The straps were supposed to secure him completely, so he could safely glide hundreds of feet above the sparkling Andaman Sea. Minutes later, Roger stood at the back of the speedboat, holding tightly onto the railing, likely feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. His wife, Butsabong, stood back on the beach, aiming her camera toward her husband, capturing every moment of this thrilling adventure. She smiled and waved as Roger gave her a thumbs up. Neither knew this was the last smile they would ever share. The boat's engine roared loudly, and suddenly Roger felt a strong tug. The parachute expanded quickly behind him, catching the wind, pulling him backward, and lifting him smoothly off the deck. He let go of the railing and floated upwards, higher and higher into the sky, his heart racing with excitement. Below him, the speedboat shrank rapidly, becoming just a small dot on the endless blue canvas of the ocean. For a moment, he was weightless, free, but suddenly, he felt something shift. Something in the harness wasn't right. The straps around his thighs had become dangerously loose, and the harness, which moments ago felt secure, was beginning to slip down his legs. He frowned, shifting again. That was strange. Was it supposed to feel like this? Then the worst happened. Roger's harness gave way completely. In one horrifying instant, his body slid through the loosened straps, and he fell through the air. From the beach, Butsabong had no idea what was happening initially. She had been recording, zooming in on her husband high in the sky. But when she suddenly saw him struggling, she must have felt pure horror. Roger fell down 100 feet from the skies into water, and at that height, hitting water wasn't like hitting a pool. It was like hitting concrete. He slammed into the waves with a brutal impact. People on jet skis and boats raced to him within moments, desperate to save him. They lifted his limp, lifeless body from the water, carrying him swiftly to shore, and placed him gently onto the sand. People frantically gathered around, desperately performing CPR, trying anything they could to revive him. But Roger's injuries were catastrophic. His body couldn't handle the brutal force of the impact, and sadly, he never regained consciousness. Roger Hussey, the man who moments earlier was flying above paradise, had passed away instantly. There was no saving him. But the biggest question was, how did this happen? Investigators quickly looked into what went wrong. At first, Some reports claimed Roger might have accidentally unstrapped himself, confusing the release mechanism with another rope. But his wife denied this, saying he hadn't panicked or touched the harness. Some experts suggested another reason. The equipment used by Thai operators seemed less secure than that used in other countries. Whether it was a design flaw or human error, Roger's adventure ended in tragedy. Both crew members were arrested and charged with negligence, but no punishment could reverse the heartbreaking outcome. One moment Roger Hussey had been flying, the next he was gone. I would say this is one of the worst cases I have ever seen of joy turning into tragedy. But our next story is even more disturbing. The sun was setting over the turquoise waters of Pemba Island, Tanzania, casting a golden glow across the ocean. It was the perfect place for a romantic getaway, isolated, peaceful, and surrounded by nature's beauty. For Steven Weber and his girlfriend, Kenesha Antoine, this vacation was about to be the most memorable trip of their lives. They were staying at the Manta Resort's famous underwater room. This is a floating cabin with a submerged bedroom, completely surrounded by glass windows, giving them a breathtaking view of the ocean. Fish swam lazily outside, the deep blue stretching endlessly in every direction. Kenesha had no idea that Steven had planned something special, something unforgettable. They had been dating for years, and Steven was a hopeless romantic who wanted to propose in a way that no one else ever had. He could have done it over dinner, at the beach, or during a sunset walk, but that wasn't enough. He wanted something bigger, more dramatic, more meaningful. And what better way than to propose underwater? And so on the afternoon of September 19th, 2019, the sun was glowing golden over the island, casting long reflections over the ocean's surface. The water looked calm and peaceful. Kenesha relaxed comfortably in their submerged room, mesmerized by colorful fish that darted back and forth outside the thick glass windows. She probably had no idea that Steven had been preparing this surprise for months, rehearsing exactly how the moment would go, planning out every step he would take. He waited for the perfect moment. Kenesha was inside their submerged bedroom, relaxing and watching the fish swim past the glass. Then, she saw movement outside. It was Steven. He had dove into the ocean, swimming toward the window. Kenesha's face probably lit up as she watched him. What was he doing? She must have been confused at first. Then he pulled out a piece of paper, carefully sealed in a plastic bag. She pressed her hands to the glass, her eyes scanning the words as Steven held it up. The note read, "I can't hold my breath long enough to tell you everything I love about you. But everything I love about you, I love more every day. Will you please be my wife? Marry me?" Kenesha's heart probably leapt into her throat at that very moment. Just imagine being her, standing safely inside that submerged bedroom, witnessing a scene straight from a movie. Steven reached into his pocket, holding up a beautiful engagement ring in a small box, pressing it gently against the glass window, hoping Kenesha would understand his silent, underwater proposal. The excitement was overwhelming. She quickly reached for her phone to capture this precious, once-in-a-lifetime moment on video. It was a moment she never wanted to forget. A perfect proposal, a perfect day. Everything was unfolding just as Steven had envisioned. But then something went wrong. As Kenesha smiled with joy, filming the entire unforgettable event, Steven suddenly appeared uncomfortable. The calm, romantic mood instantly shifted into something alarming. He began moving more rapidly, kicking his feet harder and faster. His movements became frantic, his body twisting in the water, his eyes widening in panic. What was going on? Kenesha must have felt her heart tighten as she watched the man she loved struggle outside that window, completely helpless to reach him. In mere seconds, the romantic proposal had transformed into a desperate fight for survival, and there was nothing she could do but watch. Steven struggled, trying to swim upwards toward the surface, but his body wasn't responding the way he needed it to. His lungs burned, starved for oxygen, his muscles exhausted from being underwater too long. The ring box slipped from his trembling hands, floating downward and disappearing into the murky depths below. The note was drifting away, insignificant compared to the desperate fight for his life. Kanisha watched in absolute horror, screaming Stephen's name, knowing he couldn't hear her. She slammed her fists against the thick glass, hoping somehow to break through and save him, but it was no use. Stephen's body sank lower, vanishing into the ocean's depths, away from her view. Panicked and terrified, Kanisha sprinted up the staircase of the submerged room, crying for help as she emerged from the water onto the deck above. Resort workers heard her cries and immediately jumped into action, diving into the ocean, desperate to find Stephen beneath the waves. Minutes felt like hours. Divers searched frantically, praying they would find him alive. But when they finally pulled Stephen from the water, he was completely unresponsive. Emergency responders tried everything to revive him, but it was too late. Stephen Weber had drowned. He was pronounced dead shortly afterward. So what went wrong? Despite being a strong swimmer, Stephen underestimated how long he could hold his breath. The excitement, combined with the physical effort of swimming, holding up a note and retrieving a ring, drained his oxygen faster than expected. Without breathing equipment, his dream proposal became a fatal mistake. Even the most romantic gestures can go terribly wrong. His story makes me wonder where the line between romantic bravery and reckless risk is. Is love worth any gamble, no matter how dangerous? Let me know your thoughts below, but hold on to them because things are only going to get more intense from here. Our next story takes place in Bali, Indonesia, a place where paradise meets adventure. It was supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime for 33-year-old Nilesh Mukhi and his wife, Kavita. Originally from India, Nilesh worked as a travel agent, someone whose job was literally to help other people plan their perfect holidays. For once, he had decided it was his turn. Bali was the ultimate destination, and for good reason. Bali is famous around the globe for its lush forests, breathtaking temples, and beautiful beaches after all. The island promised them an escape from everyday life, an exotic paradise where they could relax, reconnect, and finally enjoy the honeymoon they had dreamed of for years. On October 23, 2024, the couple set out to explore Nusa Penida Island, one of Bali's most Instagrammable spots. Among its landmarks was Angel's Billabong, a stunning tidal pool on cliffs above the Indian Ocean. Tourists loved it. The photos taken here make them appear to float above the sea, but its beauty hid a deadly risk. The tide could shift in an instant and send high rogue waves that sweep everything in its path into the violent waters below. Locals knew the dangers, and warning signs urged visitors to stay back. But not everyone listened. On that day, Nilesh and Kavita were accompanied by a local driver who understood the hidden dangers lurking around Angel's Billabong. He warned them clearly about the rough seas and insisted they be careful. It wasn't the first time he'd issued this warning. He knew all too well how quickly paradise could turn deadly here. But Nilesh, like thousands of tourists before him, was captivated by the view and the calm illusion of beauty. The water was calm. The waves below looked small and the sky was clear. It seemed like the perfect time for a photo. Kavita pulled out her phone, smiling as Nilesh stood by the water's edge, positioning himself for the perfect shot. He turned to her laughing and motioned for her to come closer. One last picture. One perfect memory. But what they didn't see was the monster rising behind them. A single wave, much larger than any before it, began building strength far out at sea. As it rolled toward the shoreline, it gathered momentum, growing higher and higher, a silent predator racing toward its prey. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. Before they could react, the wave slammed into the cliffside with a violence that seemed impossible moments before. It rose high above the rocks, towering over them in a terrifying instant. Kavita felt a sudden, overwhelming force hit her, knocking the air from her lungs and sweeping her backward. She crashed down hard, feeling sharp pain shoot through her body, but somehow she managed to grip onto a jagged rock, narrowly avoiding being pulled into the water below. But Nilesh wasn't so lucky. The immense force of the wave hit him head-on, ripping his grip away from Kavita and throwing him high into the air, over the edge, and into the sea. Kavita, stunned and desperate, screaming her husband's name, watching helplessly as his head disappeared beneath the crashing waves. She could barely believe what she was seeing. The man she loved, the one she had married and chosen to spend her life with, was now vanishing right before her eyes. Onlookers rushed to the cliff's edge, screaming for help, but the ocean below was unforgiving. Rescue teams mobilized quickly, deploying boats and divers to search for Nilesh. Hours passed, and despite their best efforts, he was nowhere to be found. The waves continued their relentless pounding, and the sea showed no mercy. It wasn't until the next day that Nilesh's body was finally discovered over 11 miles away from Angel's Billabong, carried far from the scene by the powerful ocean currents. The cause of death was clear and devastatingly simple. A warning from a local was ignored. And as heartbreaking as this story is, the next is not for the faint of heart. Adrienne Vaughn had worked hard for the life she had. At just 45 years old, she was the successful president of Bloomsbury USA, a top publishing company known for releasing best-selling books and changing literary trends. Her life was filled with meetings, events, and book launches, an exciting but exhausting pace. To unwind and spend quality time together, Adrienne planned a special family vacation to one of the most stunning destinations in the world, the Amalfi coast of Italy. The Amalfi coast is famous for its cliffs, pastel-colored homes, luxury yachts, and picture-perfect Mediterranean waters. It's the kind of place you dream about visiting, the kind of place you imagine when you think of luxury and relaxation. Adrienne, her husband Mike, and their two young children, aged 14 and 11, set out to enjoy every moment. After days exploring the charming Italian villages, tasting delicious local cuisine, and soaking in the Mediterranean sun, the family decided to spend an unforgettable afternoon cruising along the coast on a privately rented speedboat. On August 3, 2023, Adrienne and her family boarded the sleek motorboat in Positano, one of the most popular coastal towns on the Amalfi coast. The water was a dazzling shade of deep blue, calm and inviting, reflecting the brilliant summer sun. Adrienne smiled, feeling relaxed and happy as the boat sped gently through the waves. The kids laughed, excited by the thrill of racing over the water. Mike held her hand, the wind whipping through their hair as they admired the dramatic cliffs and shimmering sea. The scenery was breathtaking. They felt like they were living a scene straight from a movie. What they didn't know was that the man piloting their boat was far from reliable. The skipper was a 30-year-old local named Vincenzo, who was supposed to be guiding their vessel safely along the busy coastline. Instead, Vincenzo Aiello, the captain, had made a dangerous and unforgivable choice. Earlier that day, he had consumed both different types of substances, something that would later become tragically clear. But for now, Adrienne and her family trusted him to guide them safely through the waters, unaware of this hidden danger. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, the boat skimmed quickly along the coastline, approaching a popular area filled with tourists. Nearby, a large 150-foot sailing yacht lay peacefully anchored, hosting a joyful wedding reception. Guests aboard danced, laughed, and celebrated, completely oblivious to the speeding vessel approaching rapidly behind them. The yacht's captain said later that the smaller boat was moving much too fast, headed directly toward their anchored vessel. He waved his arms desperately, yelling warnings, but the motorboat showed no sign of slowing or turning away. Then, crash. Without warning, Adrienne's speedboat collided violently with the anchored sailboat. The impact, as you can imagine, was devastating. Adrienne, standing near the edge of her boat, was suddenly catapulted into the air by the sheer force of the collision and thrown directly into the spinning propellers beneath the waterline. Mike watched in horror as his wife vanished from view, only to realize seconds later that the propellers had hit her. In one horrifying instant, a beautiful family vacation had turned into an unimaginable nightmare. Panic erupted on board. Mike shouted frantically, searching the water, desperately hoping Adrienne might somehow be okay, but it quickly became clear that her injuries were catastrophic. When rescue teams arrived moments later, they pulled Adrienne from the water, and although they rushed her immediately to shore and tried everything to save her life, she tragically succumbed to her injuries within minutes. Investigators soon discovered the shocking truth. The boat captain had tested positive for substances, clearly impairing his judgment and reaction time. In a cruel twist of fate, a single reckless decision by someone they didn't even know had destroyed a family forever. Mike survived with minor injuries, as did their children, but the emotional trauma of witnessing their mother's violent death would linger forever. Our next story takes tragedy to a new level. It involves dozens of tourists, a boat captain, deadly weather, and one of the worst accidents to ever happen in the history of tourism. Imagine booking a luxury vacation to paradise, dreaming of perfect white sand beaches, turquoise waters, and unforgettable adventures. This was exactly the dream shared by dozens of Chinese tourists who traveled to Phuket, Thailand in July 2018. They had worked hard, saved money, planned carefully, and now the long-awaited trip was finally here. The highlight was supposed to be a relaxing day cruising around the stunning islands just off Phuket, taking photos, snorkeling in crystal-clear waters, and soaking up the tropical sun. But none of them knew that their perfect holiday would turn into one of the most memorable incidents in the history of Thailand. On the morning of July 5, 2018, two tourist boats named the Serenita and the Phoenix prepared to set sail from Phuket's Chalong Pier. Even before leaving shore, there were obvious signs something was wrong. The sky was darkening rapidly, and heavy clouds loomed over the horizon, signaling a violent storm approaching the area. The local weather authority issued a severe weather warning, advising all tourist boats to stay safely in port. But incredibly, these warnings were ignored by the operators who probably didn't want to disappoint paying tourists or refund their money. As the tourists boarded the boats, they probably didn't think much of the darkening skies. After all, they trusted their tour guides and boat crews. The tourists were reassured repeatedly that the conditions were safe, that the storm would pass, and that the journey would be short enough to avoid serious danger. No one aboard realized they were heading directly into the heart of the storm. As the boats moved farther out into the sea, the waves began to grow bigger, rocking the vessels back and forth with increasing force. The passengers aboard the Phoenix, mostly families enjoying their vacation together, began to feel anxious as the waves became rougher, tossing the boat from side to side violently. What had started as excitement quickly turned into panic. The crew members began frantically signaling to each other, realizing too late that they had severely underestimated the storm's power. Within minutes, the storm became much worse. Waves as high as 16 feet smashed mercilessly against the boats. The Phoenix PC, which was a diving boat carrying 101 passengers, was rocked violently by wave after wave, tipping dangerously from side to side. Tourists clung desperately to anything they could hold on to, screaming as seawater surged into the boat, rapidly filling compartments and tipping the vessel dangerously sideways. Some passengers reached desperately for life jackets as water flooded around their feet. The chaos on board became overwhelming, screams mixing with the crashing sounds of waves and splintering wood. Then came the horrifying moment everyone feared. The Phoenix capsized completely, plunging all its passengers into the raging sea. I can't even imagine the terror as families, separated in the chaos, were tossed into the unforgiving waves. The boat that was supposed to be their safe haven became a deadly prison, trapping many passengers beneath it. Frantic parents desperately clung to their children, trying to stay together in the turbulent water. Others fought helplessly to swim to the surface as heavy debris and powerful currents pulled them under. For many passengers, this sudden nightmare was their first and final experience of the ocean. Rescue teams rushed to the scene, facing brutal weather conditions themselves, fighting against violent waves as they attempted to locate survivors in the storm. Despite their brave efforts, the situation was devastating. Families back in China, anxiously awaiting updates from their loved ones, instead received unimaginable news. 47 tourists aboard the Phoenix PC had drowned. This was one of Thailand's deadliest boating disasters. An investigation revealed a tragic reality quickly. This disaster was entirely preventable. Authorities had clearly warned tour operators not to leave port, given the severe weather forecast. But profits and the desire to fulfill scheduled tours took priority over safety. The boat's crew ignored multiple warnings, gambling with their passengers' lives, betting that the weather wouldn't get that bad. In their negligence, they sent dozens of innocent tourists straight into a deadly storm. This story is so chilling because it shows how much your safety often lies entirely in the hands of strangers, some who may even be willing to risk your life for profit. Families were torn apart, lives destroyed, simply because warnings were ignored. Following this tragedy, Thailand was forced to overhaul its maritime safety laws. But for the people who boarded the boats that July 5, 2018, the reforms came far too late. Our final story takes tragedy to an even more surreal level. Imagine you're surfing, just enjoying your day on perfect tropical waters, when suddenly, out of nowhere, you become victim to one of the strangest predators in the ocean. This is the story of Giulia Manfrini. Giulia Manfrini wasn't just another tourist. At 36, she was adventurous, athletic, and obsessed with surfing. An Italian native, she traveled the world, chasing the perfect wave, always pushing her limits. In October 2024, she flew to Indonesia's Mentawai Islands, one of the world's top surfing destinations. With crystal-clear waters and legendary waves, it was a dream spot for surfers like her. On October 18th, Giulia and a group of surfers set out to Masukut Island. The weather was perfect with clear skies, gentle breezes, and rolling waves. She waxed her board, checked her leash, and paddled out eager for the ride. Between rides, Giulia might have laughed and joked with her friends, soaking in the joy of this beautiful place. But what none of them could have possibly had any idea on what was coming. Around noon, Giulia paddled out farther, waiting patiently for another perfect set of waves. As she sat upright on her board, gently rocking with the ocean's motion, the water beneath her appeared peaceful, calm, and inviting. But hidden in that calm water, a large swordfish suddenly darted rapidly toward her. Giulia probably saw only a blur of silver beneath her, before feeling an indescribable force slam into her body. The swordfish had leapt directly upward, thrusting its sharp sword-like bill with terrifying accuracy straight into her chest. The powerful impact instantly knocked Giulia off her board and into the water. The surfers around her, initially unaware of what happened, quickly turned toward the sound of splashing, and that's when they saw Giulia struggling, her body thrashing in the water. Friends paddled desperately toward her. They pulled her up onto their surfboards, frantically calling out her name, desperately trying to keep her head above water. Blood spread through the ocean around them, mixing with the waves as they lifted her onto the rescue boat nearby. Giulia was barely conscious, holding on to life by a thin thread, severely wounded from the unexpected and devastating blow. Desperate to save her life, Giulia's friends and resort workers raced back to shore as fast as possible. They carried her urgently onto the beach and rushed her immediately to the nearest health clinic. Medical personnel quickly realized her injuries were catastrophic. The swordfish's bill had penetrated deep into her chest, causing massive internal bleeding and severe trauma to vital organs. Doctors did everything they could, fighting frantically to save Giulia's life, but the injuries were simply too extensive. Tragically, Giulia Manfrini died just minutes after arriving at the clinic. Her friends were stunned. How could this happen? Swordfish attacks on humans are incredibly rare, so rare that experts would later call this event a one-in-a-million tragedy. Usually, swordfish only strike smaller prey, moving quickly through the water without ever harming people. There are many theories about why this freak attack happened. The most likely explanation was that Giulia's surfboard, moving across the water's surface, was mistaken for prey, and it attacked. As we've seen today, paradise can quickly turn deadly, even for those who think they're prepared. Want to support the channel? Join for exclusive perks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.